Well, hello and welcome to episode number 26 of the Practical EdTech Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Byrne, and today is January 3rd, 2020, the first podcast for me of the new decade. Let's get right into it. So, some news and notes from the last week. Again, kind of a quiet week as it was, vacation week for a lot of people. Some people are still on vacation. I had to go back on Thursday and Friday back in school, but a lot of schools were still off all the way through the week, so lucky you. But let's get into some news and notes of the week. First of all, from the Shameless Commerce division of my life, I want to share some changes on how I'm publishing and sharing content moving forward in 2020. More content will appear on practicaledtech.com, on edtechfitness.com, on my YouTube channel, on my podcast, and also an email. And less will appear on freetechforteachers.com. Over the last couple of months, I've tapered it back on freetechforteachers.com down to basically just 2 or 3 posts a day, working out to about 65 or so blog posts a month, which is about half of what I historically have done. And really, the reason that I'm doing that is partly a reflection on my own personal interest. A lot of my own personal interest lies in the fitness side of things right now. I also really enjoy making videos and podcasts, and I really enjoy writing emails. Believe it or not, I actually really do enjoy crafting emails that I send out. I enjoy writing the newsletters. And I can do that on a slightly less frequent basis than when I was writing freetechforteachers.com all the time and only putting my energy into that. So part of it is just my own personal interest. The other part of that is a reflection on the landscape of education and education technology and education media over the last 5 or 10 years has really started to shift, and I've really noticed it in the last year and a half to 2 years. The way that we consume media today versus 12 years ago when I started freetechforteachers.com. So we spend a lot more time watching videos than we ever did before, and the statistics bear that out. I'm not pulling that out of a hat. We spend a lot more time listening to podcasts than we ever did before. We spend less time going directly to blogs. We tend to consume more on social media and less on individual websites. So that's why there's a change coming to that. And again, that's already started to happen. I just wanted to kind of put that out there and express that to folks. Another little news and notes from this week from the Shameless Commerce division. I sat down on Monday. Was it Monday? Monday, I sat down with Tom Ritchie, and we recorded a good 45 to 50 minutes of a podcast together, and I'm going to be releasing that over the weekend. It's a good listen. I think it's a good listen. I always enjoy talking to Tom. He has a lot of great ideas about teaching with video and using videos, and it's always fun to catch up. So I think you'll enjoy that. He's an AP history teacher. Make some great AP history, AP US, AP Euro history videos. All right, some other interesting things that were published this week. Audrey Waters at Hack Education published an article, The 100 Worst EdTech Debacles of the Decade. Now, I'll say this. It's an interesting read. In typical Audrey fashion, though, you're not going to find anything positive on the list. There's nothing there that's like, yay, it was a great decade. I think probably the next time Audrey publishes something that's cheery and upbeat might be the first time. And I do like her work. I've known Audrey and known her work for many, many years. But that's just her style, and that's fine. And there's a place in the world for that. So if you're looking for something cheery, don't go read it. But if you're looking for some critical looks at EdTech over the last 10 years, what I particularly liked was her commentary about funding cycles for startups and how some startups become kind of media darlings and venture capital darlings and others don't, and how some of those media and VC darlings promise a whole lot but don't actually deliver on it. She also gets into the model of free, gets into a little bit of Google and Google's role in ed tech and education. Points out that Google killing off Google Reader back in 2013 was really a blow to a lot of independent, smaller publishers like Audrey, like myself, like many others. So when you go and take a look at that, go to hackeducation.com and you can read it for yourself. It'll take a while, but it's a good read and a good history of EdTech over the last decade. All right. Speaking of a decade of things or more, I've been blogging for 12 years, a little more than 12 years now. Been using blogs in classroom settings for that entire time as well, and actually a little bit before that. Over vacation week, or earlier this week, I published a list of 10 blogging activities for K-12 students. In that, I included some class blogs and a directory of other class blogs that you might want to look at for inspiration. And what I published there is an excerpt from that long-rumored, long-talked-about book that I will publish in 2020. So check that out. Speaking of 2020, it is the new year. New Year's resolution season is in full bore right now. One of my New Year's resolutions last year was to work out more and to get in better shape, and I did that. I worked out 305 days last year. To start off this year, one of my resolutions is to be nicer, to be a little less sarcastic particularly in social media. So I'm working on that. But the other resolution I started the year with was a No Junk January challenge. And a lot of people have jumped in on that in EdTech Fitness. In fact, 400 people subscribed to my EdTech Fitness newsletter as soon as I put that challenge out there. So if you're interested in that, go to edtechfitness.com and check out the Junk-Free January. And you can sign up or just follow me on Instagram. I publish it there as well. But all that to say that I saw a cool little service this morning called Future Me. You'll find it at futureme.org. Futureme.org. And it's a service that will allow you to write a letter to your future self, to check in on how did you do on your resolution, or how did you do on your prediction for your life a year later, or 2 years later, or 5 years later. Or even just a month later. Interesting statistic I read from U.S. News and World Report last year that 80% of New Year's resolutions fail by the end of January. So maybe just write the letter for yourself at the end of January as a reminder. Kind of a neat little thing. I published it on Facebook earlier this morning, and a lot of people continue to share it multiple times on Facebook. It's like 121 shares on Facebook last I checked. So pretty cool. Sticking with that decade or looking back at things, Scott McCloud, who's been on the podcast earlier this fall, back in the fall, I think it was episode number 5 or 6 actually. I've known Scott for a long time, more than a decade. Scott wrote an interesting article this week in which he looked at predictions that Carl Fish made in 2006 in a video called 2020 Vision. For those who are not familiar with Carl Fish is the person behind Did You Know or Shift Happens. He and Scott did those videos over a decade ago. And then Carl also did a video in 2006 called 2020 Vision, which looked at how the world would be in 2020, particularly in education and in technology. Go take a look at it. I really like the part about where Google would be in school and in our lives in Carl's predictions versus where we are today with them. So take a look at that. Go to dangerouslyirrelevant.org and you can check out 2020 Vision Revisited. Now back to 2020. TechCrunch reported this week that TikTok and its parent company have developed a face swapping feature that will basically let you make your own deep fake kind of videos. The feature hasn't been released yet. It might not ever be released. Nonetheless, it's interesting because it does exist and the technology is there. And We could see the commercialization of deep fakes, and at the very least, just knowing that that's a possibility, I think should lead to more conversations with students about data and identity privacy and being respectful, responsible digital citizens. Remember, the target audience for TikTok is our middle school, high school students. So it's a great place to have that conversation. One other neat little TechCrunch article. They reported this week that in many countries and states in the United States, Spotify is now the first or second destination for discovering podcasts, which means it's ahead of Apple Podcasts and Google Play in many places as the go-to place for discovering new podcasts, which I think is really interesting since Spotify is a parent company of Anchor, which is the service I use for distributing my podcast to not only Spotify, but all those other places, including Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Oh, very last news and notes, and then we'll get into some thoughts and some questions from readers and viewers and listeners. I, last year, held the Practical EdTech Summer Camp in beautiful Bethel, Maine at the Bethel Inn and Country Club. It was the 7th year that I had hosted a summer event, and it was the first year I hosted it at that location, and everyone who came loved the venue. There was a few people who have been to 3 or 4 of my summer events, and they all said that was the best venue yet. So I'm bringing it back to that venue this summer. I'm working out the details on the contract for the venue and the dates right now. But by the end of the month, it'll be available for early registration. So check that out. Now, thoughts from my classroom. I only was back in school for 2 days this week. We just had Thursday, Friday. So I work in a school that's a vocational or technical school. And our school coming up has a Tech Challenge Night coming up. It's an annual event in which our students compete in technical vocational competitions for prizes. They win a $100 Amazon gift card, $100 or $50 Amazon gift card, depending on placement, and bragging rights, of course. Now, the challenge for my kids is putting together a comprehensive plan for IT management and services for a small business. Some of my students did a kind of a dry run of their presentation and their plan today. What's really interesting to me about that is that my students have plenty of technical skills. They had all the technical skills needed for putting together the plan for the most part. That wasn't the part that tripped them up at all. What's really tripping them up is explaining the technical side of things in non-technical terms for a non-technical crowd. Part of the judging will be done by people who are not from the tech field. So they're struggling with that, putting that in layman's terms. And that's really where I spent a lot of my time this afternoon, is kind of coaching them on the soft skills of explaining technology to a non-technical crowd. That's kind of an interesting thing for me to do, and a lot of my students kind of struggled with it out of the box, and some were still struggling with it. They'll tell you full on that there's some kids who are going to struggle with it right up until the day that we do it. But we have that coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited about it. It's really kind of we really call it, it's a showcase. It really is what it is. All right. Now, questions from readers, viewers, and listeners like you. There were only a couple, again, vacation week this week, so I only had a couple that I think have a broad appeal, so that I'm going to share here. First one came from Max, who wrote, "Hey there, Richard. I have been using your site and ideas for a while, and my questions revolve around how does anyone keep track of all the technology that is out there and what would be best for you? With every new tech comes new ideas and new ways to incorporate it into your teaching, but you can't spend all your time trying to figure out what tech might work and forget what has worked in the past. Every new tech also brings new hope and how to figure out how to keep track of all of this and not feel overwhelmed. Thanks for any help you can offer and try to keep me focused and not visiting every rabbit hole to try to make things better. Great question. And I wrote back to Max and I said, this is something I have struggled with for 12 years, 13 years, going on 13 years now. What worked for me, what has worked for me, particularly when I was teaching social studies full time, what worked for me was creating a little framework for quickly evaluating new things that were coming out. And for me, that really came down to looking at technology from the lens of, will it help my students discover things they couldn't discover before? And that's more than just Google, right? Obviously, a Google search will give kids access to, the whole of human knowledge. Not really, but for the sake of this demonstration, we'll say for the whole of human knowledge, Google will get you there eventually. But it could also be things like, will a virtual reality application help a student discover or understand a concept better than doing the same thing or viewing the same item in a flat 2D environment? And I bring up virtual reality specifically because there was a study I found last year about using virtual reality in mathematics, and the study and I'll link it up in the show notes. The study that I read showed that students in geometry who had done this series of activities in virtual reality versus those who did the same activities not in virtual reality scored higher than the ones who had not done it in virtual reality. So there is something to be said for discovering new things that way. So I look at it now. Does it help students discover something in a new way, or does it help them demonstrate and communicate what they know in a way that they couldn't do before? So I kind of break it down that way. And then I think to myself, is this a tool that I can use in my classroom without having to spend days teaching how it works, right, in order to get the first activity running? Now, today I'm teaching computer science, so it's a little bit different. That's my whole job, is showing them how technology is constructed and works and whatnot. But when I was teaching social studies, or if I was teaching language arts, or if I was teaching anything else, I'd be looking at it from the view of, can I get this up and running, my first activity up and running, without having to spend multiple days getting kids up to speed. So that's how I look at it. And then I also try to think about, will my students really, truly get something out of this that they couldn't get anywhere else? And that gets back to did they discover something new? Did they demonstrate something in a new or interesting way that they couldn't do before? That's what it comes down to me. Then in terms of actually keeping track of it all, most days I use OneNote to bookmark things. I use OneNote and Google Keep to bookmark just about everything. So that's how I actually keep track of the things. And how do I discover the new stuff? I've got a lot of different blogs that I read. Obviously, I read TechCrunch. I just mentioned it 3 times in this podcast. TechCrunch. I read Product Hunt a lot. Product Hunt. I look at that every day. Ars Technica. All the kind of classic. It's amazing to say they're classic tech news sites, but good places to look. All right, and 2 other questions that came in, both from Cyril, who asked, I saw your Google Tours and Google Earth write-up. Would you recommend I use Google Earth since they have the built-in tour features going forward? Yes, of course, I always recommend Google Earth. I love Google Earth. The latest version of Google Earth, which is what Cyril is referring to in the email, the latest version of Google Earth for your web browser includes a tour feature. Now, it's not nearly as fully featured as the desktop version of Google Earth's tour feature, but it's still very good and very far ahead of where Google Earth was 6 months ago. So yes, definitely recommend that. Question number 2 from Cyril. What would you recommend for recording voice, then inserting into slides? And I actually made a video about this. It's in my YouTube channel. What I recommend using for simple voice recording is Vocaroo. Now, Vocaroo has a new version. Find it at beta.vocaroo.com, VOCAROO.com, beta.vocaroo.com. Go there and use their new voice recording tool. It's free, doesn't require any username or password or email or anything. Just go there, go to beta.vocaroo.com, hit the record button, start recording. It'll make an MP3 that you can download and then import into your Google Slides. That's what I would use. So, that's my recommendation. Those are my answers. If you have any questions for me, feel free to send me an email, richard@byrne.media. I'm always happy to try to answer your questions as best as I can. And I'll always get back to you. If you give me just a few days, I'll always get back to you. Unless I completely miss it. But I very rarely miss them. And if you have any other feedback for me, of course, send it to me in an email. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend and look forward to the special bonus podcast this week with Tom Ritchie. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.